Good afternoon, everybody.
Yes, welcome and thank you for joining. My name's Lynn, this is Conor, and we're from Dataiku, and we will be talking about Dataiku a little bit later in this presentation, but for now, to get started, let's talk about what else? Data. So here at Dataiku, we talk to a lot of customers. We talk to our customers about how they're getting value from data, about the return on investment that they're getting. We talk to them about their challenges. So we have a lot of data points already, but it's quite anecdotal. And so we wanted something more concrete. And so we partnered with our friends at Databricks, and we have run surveys with 400 data and AI leaders. And we want to share some of those results with you today. So first, lay of the land. We've run 2 surveys with Databricks, one in 2023, and another one that we just concluded last month, so very, very fresh. You guys are the first ones seeing these results. And we asked a similar question set last year as we did this year. We added some new questions into the mix, a little bit more specific to generative AI. And so these are the types of people that we surveyed. So our hope is that these people resonate with you. It reminds you of yourself or potentially your customers. And we're going to dive in, and you can kind of see how you stack up with our survey results. So I'll turn it over to Conor.
Awesome. So what are we going to talk about today? So first, we'll talk about the actual data. What did we find in the survey? What were the respondents? Especially, what did we hear last year? How has that changed going into this year? But the data is the starting point. We'll then start talking about sort of like, what does this mean? And if you're one of these customers or you're one of these companies that's looking at this, like, how can you make progress based on what we're hearing and what's out there? And then finally, we'll do a little bit of time on sort of like how Dataiku fits into that, especially in the Databricks ecosystem, so that you guys understand sort of where Dataiku, where our customers are finding value and sort of progressing along this journey. So spoiler alert, generative AI is a big deal. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. I'm assuming you all have at least a little bit. So that was a big feature and a lot of change in how people are perceiving data investments, AI investments, and everything. So let's talk about some of those specifics. The first one is, what are people spending on AI? On like, what are they planning to spend? What do they have out there for it? And so this, we didn't ask, so last year, like we had some questions around LLMs and things, but we weren't specifically asking around the topic of generative AI. It was like early last year, so it was pretty early into that conversation. So we don't have a diff from the year before, but really what we're seeing here is, look, the vast majority of companies that we're talking to have dedicated budgets around generative AI already. And everything, as you're seeing up here, well into the 8 figures a year that people are budgeting and planning to spend on generative AI in the next 12 months, right? The thing that's really interesting to me with this is if you go back like 18, 20 months ago, the tail end of 2022, and especially in the software world, right? The vast majority of conversations were around companies are spending too much on cloud. How do we get, like we've got this like software sort of spending glut of the couple of years of COVID. The rate environment is changing, right? And so like all these dynamics where companies were really pulling back hard on investments in data and investments in software. And that changed really fast, right? And so it's been really interesting to sort of see how quickly the conversation went from how do we spend less on this to, yeah, no, we found the money. Their money is there. And even more interesting, especially, and I've been in this space now for quite a while on both sides of the fence. I was actually a Dataiku customer. That's how I came to know the company. And so I've spent money on software, and I've been on this side of the fence as well. 33% of the respondents have a dedicated line item in their budget for generative AI technologies and projects. That's humongous, right? Like that much of a change for a topic that was not a line item on anybody's budget or P&L, less than a year ago. For that to have moved that fast really is showing like how much companies are embracing this technology at a pace that I've never really seen. The other thing that has been really cool is how much broader this is causing people to think about where they apply data and AI technologies and use cases across their organization. Right? We've sort of long seen every industry has a core function that has been analytics driven, right? In finance, you have quants, and insurance, you have actuarial and risk modeling. You have supply chain, in logistics things. Like, every industry has pockets that tend to sort of be analytically driven because that's really impactful to their business. But what we've always seen is that the leaders, the people who are sort of out ahead, are doing AI and data science wider and wider across their organizations. They're doing workforce analytics in HR. They're using it in finance when they're, a manufacturing company, or they're using it in vendor management when they're a bank or things, right? And so it's like we see as people, the more progressive companies are doing things further and further from those sort of core use cases that every industry starts with. And that's accelerated a lot in the last year, right? We haven't seen, again, this sort of change of where there's some wiggle in which ones are, the most common and everything, but we're seeing pretty much across the board, across all these different things, across operations, across customer service, all these different use cases where the amount of customers or the amount of companies that are investing in these use cases outside of their core functions has accelerated quite a bit. The other thing that we tested was really sort of around the sentiment, especially the sentiment around AI, generative AI, and how people have changed their attitudes about it from 12 months ago to today. And as you can see, the overall split, so the chart here on the left is sort of like people who think that fears about AI are either totally justified or totally overblown, and then sort of the somewhat and in between. And the overall split of sort of people who think it's maybe justified versus overblown didn't change as much, right? It's still sort of about half and half. Some people think it's too much. Some people think it's not so bad. But you see the wings dropped off, right? So the people who were really far to the one side said this is totally no big deal. The other people were like, this is going to end humanity. That dropped by almost 50%, right? And that, I think, coupled with the other question of how much do we believe that our leaders understand AI? This noise is fantastic, I love it. How much do we believe that our leaders understand the risks and benefit of AI actually increased quite a bit, right? And so that kind of couples to tell me there's a lot more understanding of the nuance here, right? This is complicated, right? This is not black and white. AI is amazing and is the solve to every problem your company has, nor is it gonna lead to Skynet and the end of the world, right? Like, the truth lies somewhere in between, which is always the case. And early on in the sort of conversations around AI, I had some entertainingly stark conversations with people who were just like, oh, we're changing everything is about our company. We'll be an entirely new company in 2 years. We're gonna be AI driven. It's gonna be everything. And I'm like, bullshit, you make hardware. You're still gonna make hardware in 2 years. Like, what does it mean that we're gonna be a completely different company because now we're an AI company? You're still gonna make routers. Like, you're a hardware company, right? I'm not saying that you can't change your company by adopting AI and sort of changing some of these things, but it's not the be all end all, nor is it something you can ignore. And I think that that's what we're really sort of seeing here is that there's a lot more understanding of the nuance, both at the sort of the desk level, the people who are using, building, and being sort of acted upon by these tools, but also the leaders. So the flip side of this is, of course, that some of the stories haven't changed at all.
Yes, we've seen a lot of great data points about how generative AI has changed.
Give me a sec. Oh. Sorry, he's working on our lovely background noise. Thanks, Tom.
We've seen a lot of great data points about how generative AI has changed the game in a lot of ways that Conor just talked about.
He fixed it.
That was it?
Thank you.
Glad that wasn't on for my part, it's on for your part. But at the same time, we found a lot of data that showed that generative AI also hasn't really changed anything. The first of being return on investment. We asked this question in 2023. We asked exactly the same question in 2024. And people aren't really getting any greater returns in 2024 than they were getting in 2023. This could mean it's maybe just too early. A lot of our customers are just getting started putting generative AI use cases into production. So maybe we just haven't gotten there yet to be able to measure that return. So that's one possible option. Another being they're not getting the return. Hopefully that's not the case, but I think time will tell whether that's the case or not. And then I think a third option is that people just don't really know how to measure their return on investment when it comes to generative AI. And I think that becomes more clear actually when you kind of remove the number of people which said, I don't know, or I can't discuss it, which is interesting in and of itself that kind of went up, people saying, I don't know what my return on investment is. But also if you take off that part of it, fewer people are really reporting return on investment at all. So it's less certain than ever before, which I think means we kind of have to double down on it even more than ever before and really make the effort to quantify that return that you're getting. It's possible that people don't know how to measure that success, but there are ways to do that. We do that with our customers, quantifying value and really making sure that all of this money that we're spending, which we saw in Conor's part of the presentation, is going somewhere and having some impact. Seems important. If we dig a little deeper on that spend number, though, that Conor showed, we actually broke down the group from 2024 into two different categories. The first we called AI pioneers, and these were people who had reported that, for example, they have systems in place for measuring return on investment, that they have organizational structures that are a little bit more mature when it comes to AI. And so we classified these people, it's about half and half, 2/3 and 1/3 of the sample. So AI pioneers versus the AI laggards, and these are people that don't have those systems in place. They're people that have a little bit less mature of a organizational structure for AI. And so we broke down that spend number to see, like, are the people who are already ahead spending more? And shocker, they are. And so people, to me, what this means is people who have the right systems in place already, they have ways to measure that return on investment, they have potentially the building blocks in place. These are the people that are really doubling down and spending even more money than the people who are potentially already behind. Potentially because they already know how to make it work. We kind of saw this already in the world of machine learning where people who could put like hundreds of models in production could very easily put thousands of models in production. So they know how to make it work at scale. And so potentially these people are ready to double down because they know it's going to give them returns, even if they're not able to measure it quite yet. And so I think the question is, will people who are ahead get further ahead? So we also broke down the spend data by what kind of return on investment that they're reporting getting. And so stay with me because I know this is a little hard to follow. And I also want to give a disclaimer that because we removed people that said, I don't know what I'm spending from the sample, it's a little bit smaller. So for example, this first bucket, the sample is quite small. So disclaimer, but I think it's still interesting because people who are unsure, reported most often not being sure of the value, are not really willing to spend, which makes sense, right? But even more interestingly, I think, is the people who are spending a lot. So the people on this bottom line here, they're not really reporting more return on investment than the other levels of spend. Why is that? So it kind of debunked our own theory, which is like the people who are spending more are getting more. Maybe not. So why might that be? We looked at we actually asked people, what are your barriers to delivering value with data analytics and AI? And what's interesting to me and kind of the theme of things haven't changed at all is these haven't really changed. We see that the top barriers are kind of still the top barriers. There's a little bit of movement at the bottom, so we see that like cost is becoming more of a concern, like we
which
kind
totally
of
makes
talked
sense.
about a little bit in the beginning, which should make a lot of sense. I think people should be concerned about cost. And there's a little bit less concern about lack of a business use case, which again also makes sense because we talked about before, people are kind of seeing where they can get value from Gen AI like deeper into the organization. But other than that, the barriers have stayed pretty much the same. So people who were struggling with things like data quality before, operationalization, quickly being able to get things into production, their workforce not being data literate enough, like these are still challenges to be solved for many people. We also did ask specifically barriers to generating value from generative AI, delivering value from generative AI. And we worded them a little bit differently, but like similar themes. Lack of access to resources is pretty similar to some of the barriers to delivering value we saw in the previous. Our employees don't know what to do with it. That's a bit similar to like the workforce issue, is like people don't know what to do. Other is bigger than I thought it would be, and actually a lot of the people who said other were worried about regulation, which is something we see a lot with our customers at Dataiku. They're worried about that regulation and is going to get in their way of delivering value. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, about why that might not be the case. And so just as a little roundup of what else hasn't changed, these are, again, our questions that we asked both years that have hovered pretty much around the same percentage. People who said in 2023 they have a data leader in the C-suite, about the same. People who said they offer company-wide AI education, about the same. Surprisingly low, in my opinion, about half of respondents offer this sort of company-wide education about what AI is and how it works. And I think that what this shows is that generative AI is not really moving the needle on key areas that have to change in order to really democratize it and democratize the use of data across an organization. So with that, where do we go? What do we do?
Let's talk about like how we actually, given some of this, especially these things that haven't changed, right? These same challenges, these same barriers, like where are the companies that are being successful? Like what are the things that they're doing there? So first, to give, if you're not familiar with Dataiku, a little bit of sort of a primer on what we do as a company and where we fit in this, so that helps sort of give that context. So Dataiku is a data and analytics development and orchestration platform. It's multimodal, so you can code in it, you can use visual tools. It's an abstraction layer away from your data, so you don't migrate data into it, so it can connect to your data wherever it is, across clouds, Databricks, various clouds as well as on-premise, to do sort of like the full spectrum of analytics, right? So we obviously work in the generative AI space, but we work in traditional core machine learning as well as just sort of basic data analytics. But then because all that happens in one place, it's wrapped and easily governable, right? And that's this basics piece that we sort of really like see where, those last few themes that Lynn was talking about, that there's still a lot to do on some of these fundamentals around data quality. We've got, I always think it's fun as a data, to sit down with a data architect or a cloud architect and sort of talk about what does our, optimal data architecture look like, or our, proposed future state or reference architecture, things like that. But it's a fiction, right? Like we draw these pretty boxes on paper, but everybody has a starting point. Nobody just gets to be like, it's all Azure all the time. Nobody gets to use anything else ever again. I've had that conversation with CIOs, and you're like, that's cool, except for the other 98% of your data that's still in MySQL or in Teradata, or that company that you just acquired that has all their data in AWS, things like that, right? So it's like we all have these extremely complex landscapes. So how do we measure data quality across stuff that's in multiple clouds and on-prem and in maybe even multiple countries and regions and stuff like that? How do we deal with the governance of who's accessing what? How are they doing it? Who's using what data, especially when a large share of the analytics that are happening in any organization are happening in somebody's laptop or on their desktop, right? How do we know what that person in finance who requested me to do a quick SQL pull for them and I sent them a file, what did they do with that? We have no idea, right? And so until we start pulling systems together that can help us look at who's using what data for what purpose, how are they using it, what types of problems, what types of use cases, like we can't get beyond some of these challenges of, well, I don't think people know how to use the data, or I don't know that they're using it for the right use cases and things along those lines. And if you don't know who's using it or how they're using it, or you don't believe that the data that they're using is good quality or for what purpose, like how could you possibly track value with like all of these like unknowns? And so doing some of these fundamentals allows you to actually go to the point where then you can put in place frameworks to track that value, right? Which is, I talked early about some of the interesting findings in terms of where spend is going, and that we've certainly seen a reversal on sort of what people are being willing to spend on generative AI. Very much sort of like turning some of the sentiment around spending in this space around over the last year. But just over a quarter of the respondents to the survey actually have a framework for, accounting for the ROI that they're getting out of what they're spending. And if you think that your CFO or your board of directors is going to be okay with writing a $10 million check for generative AI, that you can't justify the ROI of on the back end, you maybe get a year, maybe, right, of that sort of like, okay, well, we're experimenting in this and we'll give everybody enterprise chat GPT or we'll do something along those lines. Like you'll get a little bit of a window because people want to put that in their 10K report and they want to sort of show the street that they're investing in AI or whatever. But pretty quickly, somebody comes along and says, hey, what did I get for that check? And one of the things that we're very much sensitive to, and what we see happening in this space, and I think will accelerate over the next few years, is sort of what we're calling the commodity treadmill, which is just almost the like corporate equivalent of keeping up with the Joneses, right? So sort of the idea here is sort of like on one axis, we've got what you're spending. On the other axis, we're talking about the value you're getting out of it. And so every company is investing in generative AI, right? They're spending money, or the vast majority, right? So you and your favorite competitor, or least favorite competitor, however you want to put it, are both going to go to Azure, and you're going to go to OpenAI, and you're going to go to Databricks, and you're going to go to Dataiku, and you're going to figure out what this stack should be, and you're going to buy all of these tools. And it's very possible that 5 years from now, you've generated ROI, right? You've seen the value, you've improved some efficiencies, you've maybe upped your top line or things like that. And with all these tools that you've bought, and all of these identical tools that your competitor has bought and used in basically the same ways, competitively, all you've done is made a bunch of tech companies richer, which we appreciate. However, it's probably not the outcome that you're looking for in your organizations for investing in these tools. So how do you not find yourself here, right? Like, how do you find yourself where you're actually differentiating what you do as a company thanks to your investments in AI, right? And I'll go back to my snarky comment about the hardware company that I was talking to before, right? Like, you absolutely can differentiate what you do as a company through the use of AI, right? And even when you look at sort of like the big tech companies that are sort of known for AI, Amazon, Meta, Google, things like that, sure, they use AI in myriad ways across their organizations, but they use it to be better at what they're good at. They're not AI companies, right? Amazon is a customer service or customer-focused logistics and shopping company that uses AI to have better logistics, to have better customer information, to do better recommendation engine, things like that. Google uses AI to improve its search results, although that's kind of questionable right now with some of the stuff with the actual AI summaries, but that's its own story. And Meta does something. I don't really still understand what they do, but fine. They make money. They make money with it, so it's important. But that's where you want to find yourself, right? Like, 5 years from now, spending a bunch of money on AI is not going to change you from being a hardware company into something else. You're still going to be making hardware. But if you're using AI to improve your anomaly detection and improve your yield, right? If you're using AI to improve how you're selling and to improve, to change that top line. If you're using it to reduce workforce churn, you've got a more stable and more experienced workforce, right? Like, there's a lot you can do to be better at what you're already doing. I think one of the cool promises of generative AI, and one of the things that's really exciting in this moment, is where we're always have been talking about this like last mile from an AI perspective. How do you get to actually deliver value from the AI products that you're driving? Because there's still a business person trying to make a decision at the end of the day, right? Or you're still trying to automate something, but you need to make sure that you know the outcome and that you're automating those things the right way. And where we really see the sort of next phase of work, especially combining generative AI with our traditional analytics and our traditional sort of core machine learning and AI tools, is really through the idea of agents, right? And so, assuming most of you are familiar, but to sort of talk about it super briefly, right? So, right now, to solve a business problem, if I'm, the VP of supply chain or something, and I have a question about like why we're having challenges in, delivering this product line, I email my analyst, and she digs in and she, uses her knowledge of the data and her coding skills, and she sends me a report, and then I probably crap all over her report and I send it back to her, and then we do this dance back and forth a little while. Or sometimes you ask the question and And like 3 weeks later, you hear back from the analyst and you're like, all right, well, I forgot I even asked that question, right? Like how many times have you sent off a report and the person never replied, never looked at it, never anything, right? So how do we get out of this trap of this sort of like ad hoc, super manual intensive? We build these AI-powered decision systems. We build AI agents, right? And so this is that going beyond where using these generative AI tools creates chatbots and creates the ability for sort of that natural language interface with documents and text type information. And we actually start pulling into where, hey, if I want to know what's going on in this, I have structured data, I have forecasts, I have some of these like predictive maintenance things, I have all these different applications of data and AI and machine learning that we've already built that asking your AI, asking your sort of chatbot like, why were my sales in this region bad last quarter? It's not going to get that through reading some documents unless it's reading what the Wall Street Journal said about why you did bad in that, right? It's like the text doesn't give you that. You've got structured data, you've got reports, you've got all these things where so today somebody can go and drill down and dig in and do all this. So how do we provide the agents with the ability to do that and then marry that to our text data, things like that? And there's tons of different ways that we can sort of see these LLM applications trying to do this, right? So fine-tuning LLMs that are more apt for the data we're looking at, or a smaller scale LLM that's specifically for sort of the co-pilot and coding type stuff because it's been trained on Python, or self-hosted because we want this locally because it's really super sensitive data, or I'm like in the defense industry or things like that. Classification, clustering, pulling in those sort of machine learning tools that are already out there. It's built on top of your data with access to your data, keeping it local. There's all these different sort of ways and tools that we can access in here that really we have that opportunity to take these generative AI tools and really provide now a system where somebody can interact directly with the data and the systems we've already created, where now the analysts and the data scientists get to spend their time sort of monitoring the loop, monitoring the responses, helping to improve those systems, not doing that manual, I'm going to pull you some data, and I'm going to massage a report, and I'm going to do this all myself. The last piece is, of course, how do you do this quickly? Because again, that sort of, when it takes you 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get a response when you just want a PowerPoint, you're like, oh, I would like a system that lets me interact with all of my sales data and my logistics things to figure out, like why we dropped, this particular line item, went down in sales last quarter, whatever. That's a lot of systems to pull together. And this isn't a thing that we can spend 5 years creating, or this is where we go back to that slide of we've spent 5 years building a whole bunch of stuff that so did our competitors, and we're all in the exact same place on this treadmill. And so it's a lot about how do you do this quickly? How do you rapidly iterate and experiment, especially on Gen AI, where this space is moving really fast, right? New LLMs announced almost weekly, right? New versions of existing LLMs probably announced even more frequently than that. Changes in the vector database landscape, changes in how we're doing embeddings, changes, like there's all these things that are changing and moving so fast that we're really focused on how do you iterate very quickly in terms of which LLM am I using, which technology am I using, which use case am I doing, how do I continue to cycle through this and do it in a way that I can sort of, and then operationalize like LLM ops, right? I don't know if you didn't catch it this morning, our colleague Amanda Milberg, one of our data scientists, did a presentation on LLM ops using Dataiku and sort of showing using LLM as a judge and other technology to understand non-deterministic scales and all that sort of stuff, right? So if you want to go to our booth, booth 85, Amanda's there and she will happily take you through it because she's way better at that than I am. Less specifically on a specific use case, but more thinking about how to do a platform. Another one of our colleagues, one of our architects, is doing a presentation tomorrow on how to design an enterprise Gen AI platform to sort of show what components, so not just like obviously Dataiku, but sort of where are the different components you need to think about as you're moving towards this. But as a last piece, specifically, obviously you're here at the Databricks conference and you're here listening to us, so we can tell you a little bit about where does Dataiku fit with Databricks, specifically in this landscape. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, just a few words. Obviously, all the things that Conor said are things that we do well at Dataiku. And so what do we do with Databricks? So with Dataiku, users can super easily build very sophisticated visual, no-code workflows, and all of this can leverage the power of Databricks as the underlying computation engine. And so it's really all about deep, powerful connections. And a lot of our customers use Dataiku plus Databricks for 3 key reasons. Number 1 is they can do more, like what we were talking about. How do we do more? How do we go faster? And so with the ability to build these visual pipelines, you can bring more people, especially business people who know a lot about the data, they know a lot about the context. You can bring them to the table and help have them participate in the movement. We have seamless collaboration, so it's not just experts are working over here in this corner and business people and analysts are working over there in that corner. With Dataiku and Databricks, they're really working together, and that's really, really powerful when it comes to going fast, especially. And finally, with all of these people doing all of these things, you need to make sure even more that you have increased governance. We mentioned a couple slides ago in my part that a lot of people are very worried about this. They're worried that regulations are going to stifle their innovation. And so one important way to move faster and to make sure that that is not the case is to ensure that there's increased governance. And that's another reason that a lot of our customers use Dataiku and Databricks, so they can build and deploy quickly, all while giving this level of visibility to the leaders, so that they have proper review and sign off and they know what's going on and who's using which models where, so that we can justify that return on investment and be spending money and also getting value. So a couple of things. If you want to learn more about Dataiku or Dataiku and Databricks, Conor said it, come to booth 85. The survey has not come out yet. We haven't released the results. Like I said, you're the first people who kind of got a preview of all of that data. There were many, many, many more questions that we asked. We'll be writing up a full report along with Databricks that we'll be releasing in July. So if you want news on the survey, you want to read the whole thing, you want to dive into the data, great. Follow us on LinkedIn. You can stay up to date with the survey, and when it comes out, you can be one of the first to check it out after getting this great preview. So
thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it.